She made her way to Master Olddive's office. He had the hard gum ball for her and showed her how to exercise her hand around it. Not, he said, giving her the grimace of a smile, that your hand will lack exercise of other sorts around here. How much does it ache? She mumbled something, so he gave her a stern look and laid a small pot in her hand. There's only one excuse on this planet for the existence of that odorous plant known as numbweed, which is to ease pain. Use it when needed. The salve is mild enough to give you relief without loss of sensitivity. Beauty, who'd observed everything from her perch on Manoli's shoulder, gave an admonitory chirp, as if agreeing with Master Olddive. The man chuckled, eyeing the little queen. Things are lively with you lot about, aren't they? He said, addressing the fire lizard directly. She chittered in response, turning her head this way and that as if looking him over. How much larger will she grow? He asked Manoli. I understand yours are not long out of the shell. Manoli coaxed Beauty from her shoulder to her forearm so that Master Olddive could examine her closely. What's this? What's this? He asked, glancing from Beauty to Manoli. Patchy skin? Manoli was horrified. She'd been so engrossed in her own problems that she hadn't been taking proper care of her fire lizards. And here was Beauty, her back skin flaking. Probably the others were in trouble too. Oil! They need to be oiled. Don't panic, child. The matter is easily taken care of. And with one long arm, he reached the shelving above his head and without seeming to look, brought down a large pot. I make this for the ladies of the hold, so if your creatures don't mind smelling like females fair. Shaking her head, Manoli grinned with relief, remembering the stinking fish oil she'd used first for the fire lizards at the Dragonstones. Master Olddive scooped up a fingertip of the ointment and gestured toward Beauty's back. At Manoli's encouraging nod, he gently smoothed the stuff on the patchy skin. Beauty arched her back appreciatively, crooning with relief, and then she stroked her head against his hand in gratitude. Most responsive little creature, isn't she? Master Olddive said, pleased. Very. But Manoli was thinking of Beauty's deplorable attack on Master Domek. Now, I'll have a look at your feet. You've been on them too much. There's quite a bit of swelling, he said sternly. I want you off your feet as much as possible. Did I not make that clear? Beauty squeaked angrily. Is she agreeing with me or defending you? Asked the master. Possibly both, sir, because I had to stand a lot yesterday. I suppose you did, he said more kindly, but do try to keep off your feet as much as possible. Most of the masters will be understanding. He dismissed her then, giving her the extra jars and reminding her to return the next day after dinner. Manoli was glad the master had an inside office, or he'd have seen her trudging across the courtyard after her pipes, but there was no other way if she was to report with them to Master Geraint, and she didn't wish to offend another master today. The chore sections were at work in the courtyard, sweeping, cleaning, raking, and doing the general heavy drudgery to keep the Harper Hall in order. She was aware of furtive glances in her direction, but affected not to notice them. The door to the cot was half closed when she reached it, but Manoli clearly heard the voices raised inside. She's an apprentice! Pona was shouting in strident, argumentative tones. He said she was an apprentice. She doesn't belong with us. We're not apprentices. We've rank to uphold. She doesn't belong in here with us. Let her go where she does belong, with the apprentices. There was a vicious, hateful edge to Pona's voice. Manoli drew back from the doorway, trembling. She lay flat against the wall, wishing she were anywhere but here. Beauty chirped questioningly in her ear and then stroked her head against Manoli's cheek, the perfumed salve of sweetness in Manoli's nostrils. One thing was certain. Manoli did not want to go into the cottage for her pipes. But what would happen if she went to Master Geraint without them? She couldn't go into the cot, not now. Her fare swirled about, deprived of their customary landing spot by the closed shutters of Manoli's disputed room, and she wished with all her heart that she could consolidate her 9 fire lizards into one dragon, and be borne aloft and between, back to her quiet cave by the Dragonstones. She did belong there because she'd made it her place, hers alone. And really, what place was there for her in the Harper Hall, much less the cot? She might be called an apprentice, but she wasn't part of their group either. Ranley had made that plain at the dining table. and Master Marshall didn't want her to presume to be a harper. Master Domick would assume she disappeared for all he'd been willing to teach her. She had played well for him, scarred-handed... Callie! She had played well for him, scarred hand and all. She was certain of that. And she was clearly a far better musician than the girls. No false modesty prompted that evaluation. If her only use at the Harper Hall was to instruct people on being bogus seamen or turning fire lizard eggs, someone else could as easily perform those services. She'd managed to alienate more people than she'd made friends, and the few friends she'd acquired were far more interested in her fire lizards than they were in her. Briefly, she wondered what welcome she would have received if she hadn't brought the fire lizards or the 2 eggs with her. Then there would have been no fire lizard song for the Master Harper to rewrite, and he'd apologized to her for that. The Master Harper of Pern had apologized to her, Manoli of Half Circle Seahold, for improving on her song. Her songs were what he needed, he said. Manoli took in a deep breath and expelled it slowly. She did have music in the Harper Hall, and that was important. There might not be girl harpers, but no one had ever said there couldn't be girl songcrafters. And that mightn't be a bad future. Not to think of that now, Manoli, she chided herself. Think what you're going to do when you appear before Master Durant with no pipes. He might seem absent-minded, but she doubted very much if he really was. The pipes were in her room, on the little press, and nothing, not even obedience to and love of the Master Harper, would force her into the cot while those girls were raging on about her. Beauty took off from her shoulder, calling to the other fire lizards, and when they were all in midair above her, they disappeared. Manoli pushed herself away from the cot's wall and started back to the Harper Hall. She'd think of something to say to Master Durant about the pipes. The fire lizards exploded into the air above her, squealing so shrilly that she looked up in an alarm. They were grouped in a tight cluster, hovered just a split second while her eye took in their unusual formation, and then they parted. Something dropped. Automatically, she held out her hands, and the multiple pipes smacked into her palms. "Oh, you darlings! I didn't know you could do that!" She clutched the pipes to her, ignoring the sting of her hands. Only the stiffness in her feet prevented her from dancing with the joy of relief and the discovery of this unexpected ability of her friends. How clever they were, going to her room and bringing her the pipes. No one could ever again say in her presence that they were just pets and nuisances, good for nothing but trouble. The worst storm throws up some wood on the beach, her mother used to say, mostly to soothe her father caught hold-bound during a storm. Why, if she hadn't needed the pipes so badly, and if the girls hadn't been so nasty, she'd never have discovered how very clever her fire lizards could be. It was with a considerably lightened heart that she entered Master Durant's workshop. The place was unexpectedly empty. Master Durant, bent over a vise attached to his wide and cluttered work table, was the only occupant of the big room. As she could see that he was meticulously gluing veneer to a harp shaft, she waited and waited, and waited until, bored, she sighed. "Yes. Oh, the girl. Where have you been this long time? Oh, waiting, I see. You brought your pipes with you?" He held out his hand, and she surrendered them. She was a bit startled by the sudden intensity of his examination. He weighed the pipes in his hand, peered closely at the way she had joined the sections of reed with braided sea plant. He poked a tool into the blow and finger holes. Muttering under his breath, he brought the pipes over to the rank of windows and examined them minutely in the bright afternoon sun. Glancing at her for permission, he arranged his long fingers appropriately and blew on the pipes, his eyebrows arching at the pure, clear tone. "Sea reeds? Not fresh water?" "Fresh water, but I cured them in the sea." "How'd you get this dark shine?" "Mixed fish oil with seagrass and rubbed it in warm." "Makes an interesting hint of purple in the wood. Could you duplicate the compound again?" "I think so." "Any particular type of seagrass or fish oil?" "Packtail." And despite herself, Manoli winced at having to mention the fish by name. Her hand twitched. "And shallow water seagrass, the sort that clings to sandy bottoms rather than rock." "Very good." He handed her back the pipes, gesturing for her to follow him to another table where drum rings and skins of varying sizes had been laid out, as well as a reel of the oiled cord necessary to secure drum hides to frame. "Can you assemble a drum?" "I can try." He sniffed, not critically, reflectively, Manoli thought, and then motioned for her to begin. He turned back to his patient woodworking on the harp. Knowing that this was likely another test, Manoli examined each of the 9 drum frames carefully for hidden flaws, for the dryness and hardness of the wood. Only one did she feel worth the trouble, and the drum would be a thin, sharp-sounding instrument. She preferred a drum with deep, full notes, one that would cut through deep voices in a chorus and keep them on the beat. Then she reminded herself that here she would scarcely have to worry about keeping singers in time. She set to work, putting the metal clips on the frame edge to hold the skin. Most of the hides were well cured and stretched, so that it was a matter of finding one the proper size and thinness for her drum frame. She softened the chosen hide in the tub of water, working the skin in her hands until it was flexible enough to draw across the frame. Carefully, she made slits and skewered the hide to the clips, symmetrically, so that one side wasn't pulled tighter than another, lest it make an uneven tone along the outside of the drum and a sour one in the center. When she was sure that she had the hide evenly placed, she lashed it around the frame, 2 fingers from the edge of the surface. When the hide dried, she'd have a taut drum. Well, you do know some of the tricks of the trade, don't you? She nearly jumped out of her own hide at the sound of Master Durant's voice right by her elbow. He gave her a little wintry smile. She wondered how long he'd been standing there watching her. He took the drum, examining it minutely, humping to himself, his face making a variety of contortions that gave her no real idea of his opinion of her handiwork. He put the drum carefully on a high shelf. We'll just let that dry. You'd better get yourself off to your next class. The juniors are about to arrive, I hear, he added in a dry, unamused tone. Manoli became immediately conscious of exterior noise, laughter, yells, and the dull thudding of many booted feet. Dutifully, she made her way to the chorus room where Master Shonagar, seemingly not having moved since she'd left him the day before, greeted her. Assemble your friends, please, and have them dispose themselves to listen, he told her, blinking a bit as the fire lizard swept into the high-ceilinged hall. Beauty took up her favorite position on Manoli's shoulder. You, and one long, fat forefinger pointed directly to the little queen. You will find another perch today. The forefinger moved inexorably toward a bench. There. Beauty gave a quizzical cheep, but obediently retired when Manoli silently reinforced the order. Master Shonagar's eyebrows ascended into his hairline as he watched the little fire lizard settle herself, primly flipping her wings to her back, her eyes whirling gently. He grunted, his belly bouncing. Now, Manoli, shoulders back, chin up but in, hands together across your diaphragm. Breathe in from the belly to the lungs. No, I do not want to see your chest heaving like Smith's bellows. By the end of the session, Manoli was exhausted. The small of her back and all her midriff muscles ached. Her belly was sore, and she felt that dragging nets for offshore fishing would have been child's play. Yet she'd done no more than stand in one spot and attempt, in Master Shonagar's pithy phrase, to control her breathing properly. She'd been allowed to sing only single notes, and then scales of 5 notes, each scale done on the breath, lightly but in true tone and on pitch. She'd have gutted a whole net of packtail with less effort, so she was intensely grateful when Master Shonagar finally waved her to a seat. Now, young Peemer, come forward. Manoli looked around in surprise, wondering how long Peemer had been sitting quietly by the door. The other morning, Manoli, our ears were assailed by pure sound in descanto chorus. Peemer here seems of the opinion that the fire lizards will sing for or with anyone. Do you concur? They certainly sang the other morning, but I was singing too. I do not know, sir. Let us conduct a little experiment, then. Let us see if they will sing when invited to do so. Manoli winced a little at his phrasing, but Peemer's wry smile told her that this was Master Shonagar's odd version of humor. Supposing I just sing the melody of the chorus we were doing the other morning, said Peemer, because if you sing with me, they're still singing with you and not along with me. Less chatter, young Peemer, more music, said Master Shonagar, sounding extremely base and impatient. Peemer took a breath, properly, Manoli noticed, and opened his mouth. To her surprise and delight, a true and delicately sweet sound emerged. Her astonishment registered in the twinkle in Peemer's eyes, but his voice reflected none of his inner amusement to her reaction. Belatedly, she encouraged her fire lizards to sing. Beauty flitted to her shoulder, wrapping her tail lightly around Manoli's neck as she peered toward Peemer, cocking her head this way and that as if analyzing the sound and Manoli's command. Rocky and Diver were less restrained. They flew from their perch on the sand table and, rearing to their haunches, began to sing along with Peemer. Beauty gave a funny scolding sound before she sat up, one forepaw resting lightly on Manoli's ear. Then she took up the descant, her fragile voice rising sure and true above Peemer's. His eyes rolled in appreciation, and when Mimic and Brownie joined in, Peemer backed up so that he could see all of the singing fire lizards. Anxiously, Manoli glanced at Master Shonagar, but he sat, his fingers shading his eyes, engrossed in the sounds, giving absolutely no indication of his reception. Manoli made herself listen critically, as the master was undoubtedly doing, but she found little to criticize. She hadn't taught the fire lizards how to sing. She had only given them melody to enjoy. They had enjoyed it and were expressing that enjoyment by participation. Their voices were not limited to the few octaves of the human voice. Their piercingly sweet tones resonated through their listeners. She could feel the sound in her ear bones, and from the way Peemer was pressing behind his ears, he felt it as well. "There, young fellow," said Master Shonagar as the echo of the song died away. "That'll put you in your place, won't it?" The boy grinned impudently. "So they will warble with someone besides yourself," the master said to Manoli. Out of the corner of her eye, Manoli saw Peemer reach out to stroke Rocky, who was nearest him. The bronze immediately rubbed his head along Peemer's hand. Whether in approval of the singing or in friendship was irrelevant, judging by the charmed expression on the boy's face. "They're used to singing because they like it, sir. It's difficult to keep them quiet when there's music about." "Is that so? I shall consider the potentialities of this phenomenon." And with a brisk wave, Master Shonagar dismissed them all. He settled his hand against his propped arm and almost immediately began to snore. "Is he really asleep, or shamming?" Manoli asked Peemer when they were out in the courtyard. "Far as anyone's able to tell, he's asleep. The only thing that'll wake him is a flat tone or meals. He never goes out of the chorus hall. He sleeps in a little room at the back. Don't think he could climb the steps anyway. He's too fat. Hey, you know, Manoli, even in scales, you've got a pretty voice. Sort of furry." "Thanks." "Don't mention it. I like furry voices," Peemer went on, undismayed by her sarcasm. "I don't like high, thin, screechy ones like Briala or Pona." And he jerked his thumb toward the cot. "Say, hadn't we better feed the fire lizards? It's nearly supper time and they look kind of faded to me." Manoli agreed as Beauty, riding on her shoulder, began to creel piteously. "I sure hope that Shonagar wants to use the fire lizards with the chorus," Peemer said, kicking at a pebble. Then he laughed, pointing to the kitchen. "Look, Camo's ready and waiting." He was there, one thick arm wrapped about an enormous bowl, heaped high with scraps. He had a handful raised to attract the fire lizards, who spiraled in on him. Uncle and the two green aunties had decidedly adopted Camo as their feeding perch. They took so much of his attention that he didn't notice that Rocky, Lazy, and Mimic draped themselves about Peemer to be fed. It certainly made it easier to apportion the scraps fairly with 3 people feeding. So when she caught Peemer glancing about the courtyard to see if anyone was noticing his new task, Manoli suggested that he'd be needed on a permanent basis if that didn't get him into any trouble with the masters. "I'm apprenticed to Master Shonagar. He won't mind, and I sure as shells don't." Whereupon Peemer began to stroke the bronze and the 2 browns with an almost proprietary affection. As soon as the fire lizards had finished gobbling, Manoli sent Camo back into the kitchen. There had been no loud complaints from Abuna, but Manoli had been conscious of being watched from the kitchen windows. Camo went willingly enough, once she assured him that he'd be feeding the fire lizards again in the morning. Sated, the 9 lizards spiraled upward to the outer roof of the hall to bask in the late afternoon sun, and not a moment too soon. They were only just settling themselves when the courtyard became full of men, boys and men, filing into the hall for their supper. "Too bad you gotta sit with them," Peemer said, jerking his head at the girls seated at their table. "Can't you sit opposite me?" asked Manoli, hopeful. "It would be nice to have someone to talk to during the meal." "Nah, I'm not allowed anymore." "Not allowed?" Alternating between sour disgust and pleased recollection, Peemer gave a shrug. "Pona complained to Dunca, and she gone on to Sylvina." "What'd you do?" "Oh, nothing much." Pemer's shrug was eloquent enough for Manoli to guess that he'd probably been downright wicked. Pona's a sorry weary hen, you know, rank happy and pleased to pull it, so I can't sit near the girls any more. She might regret the prohibition, but it enhanced her estimation of Pemer. As she reluctantly made her way toward the girls, it occurred to her that all she had to do to avoid sitting with them was to be late to meals. Then she'd have to sit where she could. That remedy pleased her so much that she walked more resolutely to her place and endured the hostility of the girls with fortitude. She matched their coldness with stony indifference and ate heartily of the soup, cheese, and bread, and the sweet pasty that finished the simple supper. She listened politely to the evening announcements of rehearsal times, and the fact that Threadfall was expected midday tomorrow. All were to hold themselves close to the hall, to perform their allotted tasks before, during, and after fall. Manoli heard, with private amusement, the nervous whispering of the girls at the advent of Threadfall, and permitted herself to smile in disdain at their terror. They couldn't really be that afraid of a menace they'd known all their lives. She made no move to leave the table when they did, but she was sure that she caught Audiva's wink as the girls followed the others out. When she judged them well away, she rose. Maybe she'd be able to get back into the cot again without confronting Dunca. "Ah, Manoli, a moment if you please." The cheery voice of the Master Harper sang out as she reached the entrance. Robinson was standing by the stairs talking to Sibel, and he gestured for Manoli to join them. "Come and check our eggs for us. I know Lessa said it would be a few more days, but—" and the Harper shrugged his anxiety. "This way." As she accompanied the two men to the upper level, he went on. "Sibel says that you're a mine of information." He grinned down at her. "Didn't ever think you'd have to talk fish in a Harper Hall, did you?" "No, sir, I didn't. But then I don't think I really knew what does go on in a Harper Hall." "Well said, Manoli, well said." And the Harper laughed as well as Sibel. "The other crafts can jibe that we want to know too much about what is not strictly our business, but I've always felt knowledge of matters, minor or major, makes for better understandings. The mind that will not admit it has something more to learn tomorrow is in danger of stagnating." "Yes, sir." Manoli caught Sibel's eye, anxiously hoping that the Harper had not heard the minor, or was it major, matter about her missing her scheduled lesson with Domick. An almost imperceptible shake of the brown man's head reassured her. "Give me your opinion of our eggs, Manoli, for I must be out and about a great deal, but I don't wish to risk the hatching without me in attendance, right, Sibel? Nor do I wish 2 fire lizards instead of the 1 I'm entitled to." The two men exchanged knowing glances as Manoli obediently checked the eggs in their sand-filled warm pots. She turned each one slightly so that the colder side faced the heat of the glowing embers on the hearth. Robinson added a few more blackstones and then eyed her expectantly. "Well, sir, the eggs are hardening, but they're not hard enough to hatch today or tomorrow. So will you check again tomorrow morning for me, Manoli? I must be away, although Sibel will always know where I can be reached." Manoli assured the Master Harper that she would keep a watchful eye on the eggs and inform Sibel if there were any alarming changes. The Harper walked her back through his study to the door. "Now, Manoli, you've played for Domick, been thoroughly catechised by Morshall, and sung for Shonagar. Durant says your pipes are quite allowable, and the drum is well constructed and should dry out sound. The fire lizards will sing sweetly with others than yourself, so you've accomplished a very great deal in your first days here. Hasn't she, Sibel?" Sibel agreed.
Wait, I just realized she's only been here for like 3 days.
Yeah. Sibel agreed, smiling at her in a quiet, kind way. She wondered if either man knew how Duncan and the girls felt about her presence in the Harper Hall. "And I can leave the matter of the eggs in your good hands. That's grand. That's very good indeed," the Master Harper said, combing his fingers through his silvered hair. For a fleeting moment, his usually mobile face was still, and in that unguarded moment, Manoli saw signs of strain and worry. Then he smiled so cheerfully that she wondered if she'd only imagined his weariness. Well, she could certainly spare him anxiety about the fire lizards. She checked them several times during the day, even if it made her late to Master Shonagar. As she returned to the cot, pleased that there was some small way in which she could serve the Master Harper, she recalled what he'd said about fish in a Harper Hall. For the first time, Manoli realized that she'd never really thought about life in a Harper Hall, except as a place where music was played and created. Badirian had spoken hazily about apprentices and his time as a journeyman, but nothing in detail. She had imagined the Harper Hall as some magical place where people sang all conversations, or earnestly copied records. The reality was almost commonplace, up to and especially including Dunca and the spiteful Pona. Why, she had considered all Harpers and Harper people above such pettiness, endowed with more humanity than Marshall or Domick had shown her. She did not know why. She smiled at her naivete. And yet, harbours like Sibel and Robinton, even cynical Domick, were above the ordinary, and Sylvina and Peemer were basically good and certainly had been kind to her. She was in far better circumstances than she'd ever enjoyed in Half Circle, so she could put up with a little unpleasantness, surely. It was as well she had reached this conclusion because no sooner was she inside the door than Dunca pounced on her with a list of grievances. Manoli received a tirade about her fire lizards, how dangerous and unreliable the creatures were, how they must behave themselves or Dunca would not tolerate them, that Manoli had better realize how little rank mattered in Dunca's cot, and that as the newcomer she must behave with more deference to those who had been studying far longer at the Harpercraft Hall. Manoli's attitude was presumptuous, uncooperative, unfriendly, and discourteous, and Dunca was not having a tunnel snake in her cot, where the girls were as friendly and as considerate of one another as any fosterer could wish. After the first few sentences, Manoli realized that she could put forth no defense of herself or her friends acceptable to Dunca. All she could do was say yes and no at appropriate intervals when Dunca was forced to stop for breath. And every time Manoli thought the woman must surely have exhausted the subject, she would surge onto another imagined slight until Manoli seriously considered calling beauty to her. The appearance of the fire lizard would certainly curtail the flow of abuse, but would irrevocably destroy any possibility of getting into Dunca's fair record. "Now, have I made myself plain?" Dunca asked unexpectedly. "You have." And since Manoli's calm acceptance momentarily robbed Dunca of speech, the girl flew up the steps, ignoring the stiffness of her feet and grinning at the explosive and furious reprimands Dunca made at her retreat.